Yes, 3 is a magic number. That Schoolhouse Rock episode influenced a lot of my life and the way I think about things. And it's funny because now brain science is telling us that the rule of 3 or the power of 3 is a true thing. Brain science tells us that we're only good at hanging on to 3 big things, all right? Maybe a fourth, right? But 3 big things, only 3 big things, 3 big topics at a time. That is kind of like the human max whip or best whip limit, right? 3 big things in which we're decomposing those things, right? I might want to be taking a vacation to Iceland next year, right? I don't have a passport, so I have to start thinking about, if I want to take that trip to Iceland, what are all the things I need to do? So I need to start planning so that I'm doing all the right things in the right time and the right steps. At the same time, I also have my regular work that's going on. I've got a clear focus about what I need to learn to do my job, what it is I need to do when I engage with a customer, how I'm going to have to listen to them. So that is a second big thing. So these are 2 big things. And the third big thing might be a relationship. Maybe I'm in a relationship or wanting a relationship. Or maybe that third big thing is a passion project, getting involved in theater or writing a book or whatever the case might be. But it's 3 things that most of us are really focused on at any given time in our life. And if that's true for an individual, it's true for an organization, because an organization is nothing but a group of individuals collected into a unified expression, right? Not a hive mind per se, but there you are as a group with a way that you think collectively. And as a collective group, three big things. It's the nature of things. Look, growing up, there was always the 3 big companies, the 3 big motor corporations, the 3 big cable companies, the 3 big phone companies. Now it's the 3 big cellular companies, the 3 big software. The big 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So this is all about the rules of 3 and the power in the rules of 3. All right. So I just talked about how brain science says there's only 3 things we can focus on, 3 big things we can focus on, maybe a fourth if one of the big things, one of the 3 big things is a bit smaller in nature, right? This is about managing scope, but not going over what you know your max is. Again, it's the whip limit of humanity. Simply is. So if there are 3 big things we can focus on, we have to make sure that we have a very clear vision about that. And that's the next big 3 thing we need to talk about, is that every organization must have, in order for it to be effective and to gain performance state, of a clear vision of why they are out to solve the problem they are out to solve. A very clear mission as to how they are going to solve the problem that they want to solve. And then lastly, the values by which they want to solve that problem and deliver it. So vision, mission, and value. Now here's something that we tend to overlook when we think about a mission, vision, and values. There's a lot of lip service. When I was in the early 2000s, I did a lot of wordsmithing on these things, right? Mission and vision were the big thing. We must have a mission and a vision. Even the Marine Corps, towards my latter time in there, were coming out with things that you must know, right? There was, whenever you quantify anything, and even what I'm doing right now, talking about the rules of 3 and the power of the rules of 3, is you immediately turn it into something that can be consumed and therefore made into lip service. Oh yes, I know it. It becomes a buzzword, synergy, all the things that have true value and meaning that lost them due to how easy it is to encapsulate a concept by a simple phrase or a term. So lip service is what I'm talking about. The problem with lip service is that everybody reads it, everybody knows. None of what you're saying means anything, and therefore I've got to figure it out for myself. That's always disruptive to an organization. You're not as performant as you can be. It's proven again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Give people a clear reason why they're doing what they're doing, and they will align themselves to it and deliver beyond expectation if they believe in it. And your job as a leader, or as a servant leader, anyone's job as a leader, that is to get them to believe in that. So how do you do that? With a clear vision. These are the problems we're going to solve. Look, John Deere laid it on the line a little while ago, and they said, we want to feed the world. Boom, that's a vision. That's a mission and a vision. That's a vision of a mission. It's a mission and a vision, but they had a clear concept as to how. And there is a video that they put together that showed technologies not yet in existence, right? But that was the aspirational goal of how you empower the farmer itself so that they might all collectively feed the world using John Deere technology, making it easier, more efficient, capable of adapting to the changes that might occur in the environments that you're growing food in, so that you're always providing food and feeding the world. Amazing. Who doesn't want to work towards feeding the world, right? So that's a very clear mission and vision, and they had a clear set of values by which they were going to do it. The reasons by, the ways in which they were going to carry themselves in the execution of the mission and the vision. Now, what a lot of people just don't get about these three things, when well thought out and put together properly, aligned behind that vision, that clear, compelling why, that's your culture. What? That's your culture. That's how you build your culture. It's what attracts the people to you that will execute against what it is that you want. That big problem that's trying to be solved. So that's why a clear mission, vision, and values, or vision, mission, values, are necessary, right? It's not because somebody thinks they look good hanging on the wall and that the right phrase I delighted my customer today. Oh, come on. Do we really understand what delighting the customer means anymore? A delighted customer is someone who walks away from the experience feeling uplifted, as if they were the star of the show. That the focus was on them. That's how you delight customers. By making them feel as though they didn't have any problems whatsoever in their experience with you at any level. So that has to be inculcated. That's part of your culture. You have to have a desire to serve at that level, to let people feel that way when they interact with your product or you, for that matter. This is what builds your culture. So that's the second one. We can only think of three big things. How do we contain three big things for the execution of a business? Hey, I know. Let's put them in mission, vision, value. Those are the three big things. This is how we're going to do it. This is why we're going to do it. This is what we're going to do, right? And then within those things, we can break it down even further into other sets of threes, which lead to the next aspect of the next big three. The next big three is any organization. I don't care whether you're a software company or not. Any organization is going to have the same three primary layers. Three primary layers. That's it. Just three. I need some water. Hang on a second. Copyright issues. I don't know if anybody could figure out what that one was. All right. So there are three primary layers to any organization. There is the layer that carries the vision. That visionary layer is the executive layer, right? It's the executives. Those are the ones who are looking towards the future. That big problem, that true problem that organization is trying to solve. So that's the strategic layer. Then there's the layer that does the work. That's the execution layer, right? So in the software company, that's developers. In a marketing company, it's the people who write the content and put it out, right? But in between the two, there's another layer. And that's the coordinating layer. Most often called product, PMO for softwares, right? This is where that group of people who are responsible for taking the concepts of the executives and figuring out the best way to decompose those concepts into practical approaches aligned to the strategic vision that those executives have and those short-term visions or strategies to execute the greater vision, 1 to 3 years in time frame, and we'll talk about that as well, I think. I don't know if that falls in the threes. We'll find out as we go. Right. So they're there to take that work and interpret it to the people who actually do the work. Now, in healthy organizations, in agile organizations, I don't know, healthy, agile, in an organization that is self-reflective, let's put it that way, it's listening when at any layer, there is feedback. Just like we listen to our body when we're stretching. If we try to stretch a little too far, we feel that pull and we go, oh, I don't want that going. That would be a bad thing, right? So we have to listen at all levels of the organization for that natural pushback about what is achievable and what is aspirational still, and what we have to do to get in appropriate shape to achieve the aspirational, right? So those are the three layers. There's the strategic, there's the coordinating, and then there's the executing layer. And I don't care what business you're in, and that's how it works. And each one of those layers has three big things that it's focusing on, right? At the strategic layer, it's the near term, midterm, and long term, right? So the three basic horizons. At the production layer, they're looking at the time span of roughly 1 month to a year and a half. And down at the execution layer, I knew time would come back into it. There are three basic layers of time. Down at the execution layer, this is from the daily to the monthly time frame. So these are your three basic planning layers and the planning time frames by which you're going to organize your work, and you have to think about how you coordinate that. So there's that, the three layers. Now, there are three things every business needs. If we understand that these are the three layers, there are three things every business needs to be successful in its organization and execution against its vision, mission, values, right? The big three themes that they're going to put in place, those three big strategic initiatives for that year or maybe the next year and a half. So what is it that they need to be able to do these things, right? So we're very clear on what they want to accomplish, but how do we go about doing it? What do we need in order to do these things? Three things. I need some tea now. Okay, so, and these three things, check it out. Here's the beautiful thing about everything I talk about. It's infinitely scalable. Just think about it. I'm not expecting you to agree with it right now. Walk away, think about it. All of this is infinitely scalable. By that I mean it applies to one and many, right? If I can apply it to a business, I can apply it to myself. I can apply it to myself, I can apply it to a business. This is it's natural. Just gonna leave that there for now. All right, so what are these three things that a business needs or any organization needs in order to be successful? They need visibility, predictability, and responsiveness. All right, visibility, predictability, and responsiveness. It's what anybody needs. You need to have insight into the environment that you operate in, that you garner your resources from, right? So if I'm a software company, I need to understand the market that I'm selling to. I need to understand their needs. I have to have clear visibility into the competition, the threats in my landscape that might put risk in the way of my harvesting those resources that I'm looking to get to keep me alive and to keep me growing, right? So I need visibility into the external environments so I have a full understanding of how best I might accomplish that vision, mission, and by what values, okay? Then I need the internal visibility. I need to have a full awareness of what's going on inside of me and how I do things. Look, if I'm a pitcher in the major leagues, right, I have studied the art of pitching. I know what my body is doing in order to hurl that ball 90 plus miles an hour and to have it curve where and when I want it, right? That's all we're talking about, is that visibility into your processes. In other words, how does it work and where is it not working right, so that we can rehabilitate it, do any remedial work, or simply coach it up, make it stronger, give it exercise. That's all it takes. It's like yoga for an organization. Yoga makes you conscious of your body and how it interacts with itself and how you apply muscles and how you use stretch and how you use it. So this is all we're talking about visibility, is an understanding of your current state of being internally as well as externally. When you have a clear and transparent picture of all the information necessary for you to approach executing that vision, mission by those values, then you are ready to really think about your predictable state. That's the second thing, right? So now I've got full visibility. Full visibility tells me exactly what my current predictable state is. Good or bad, toss away a judgment. We're looking at a baseline. Once I have full visibility into everything that I need to know, external and internal, I now have a very clear understanding of my ability to respond, right? How predictable am I in delivering what I say I'm going to do? How predictable am I in responding to changes in my market or internal conditions, right? So let's just say on the, we'll call it quarterly boundary, whatever you want to call that time frame. For an agile world, doing safe, that's a PI. For other agilists or software delivery people, that's a release. For fiscally minded people, that is just a quarter, right? So let's just say in a quarterly period of time, whatever it is you expect to deliver in that 3-month period, what percentage of it are you delivering regularly? On average, over the last 3 to 5. Notice the last 3, right? That's another big 3. The average over the last 3. That tells us the closest real world understanding of your average capability of delivering at that time. Now, the goal in an agile environment or in any predictable environment, or what I would like to call a responsive environment, is about 80% plus or minus 15, right? About 80% plus or minus 15 over the quarterly boundary. Now, that plus or minus 15, you really don't want to be sitting at a 65 average regularly. That's a good baseline, but aspirational is you want that 80 plus, not the minus side of the 15. You want the plus side, right? So that's the predictable piece. Once I understand the current state of predictability, how likely I am to respond within a given period of time and how effective that response might be, then I know where I need to improve, and I can become more predictable and therefore more responsive, so that in time, not only do I respond positively and well and quickly to those changes in the market, whatever it is that I'm selling or trying to garner, I'm actually starting to lead it because I'm so predictable at such a broad over such a period of time that it's hard to dispute that we're leading things, right? When you're the first one to the market, now you're the leader, and that's the goal, is to get you into the leader. Now, the other thing I want to talk about are when we're trying to execute. So now we understand there are 3 big things, 3 big themes that we focus on, right? There are 3 business needs that every business has. There are 3 primary layers of the organization. Each one of those has those 3 primary needs, right? So the executive layer or the strategic layer needs visibility, predictability, and responsiveness at their level, right? The coordinating layer, visibility, predictability, and responsiveness at their layer. At the execution layer, visibility, predictability, and responsiveness. Now, I want to bring up another 3. Now that we understand that there are 3 primary layers, and however we want to organize it or stratify it even further, that's fine, so long as you contain them within their groups with the appropriate Venn overlapping places, and that the focuses are appropriate in each layer. And we'll get to that. What are those appropriate focuses? The next thing that we need to understand, and I think I'm going to have to pause for just a second here and bring up some reference material. So if you see a jump in the video, give me a second, all right? But what I want to talk about are the 3 obstacles that every organization has to deal with in the execution of their, I got to find a better way to, I'm going to say it's the VMIV, the vision, the mission, and the values, the VMIV. Maybe, maybe not. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I gotta do a thing on the screen over on this side because there it is. So there are 3 obstacles, right? There are 3 obstacle types that organizations have to overcome in executing their vision, mission, and by the values. So the first one is environmental, right? So environmental is really difficult to overcome because it's physical, it's technical, it's mechanical. It's a thing that can't be changed. If I have an office building with a great big open space, but every 50 feet there's a huge support column, 3 by 3, in the middle of that open space, that's a physical obstacle I can't do anything about. I have to accept that obstacle, and I have to learn what methods and processes do I need in order to pass information around that obstacle or to execute around that obstacle. It becomes a part of the given set of conditions you have to deal with. Technical is the same thing, right? Maybe you just don't have the budget for the right equipment, or that equipment is yet to exist and you are a part of the bleeding edge solution for it. But that is a environmental obstacle, right? And the last one, mechanical. So in the same vein as technical, maybe the thing that you need just doesn't exist, or it can't help it. It's a big rock. It's in your way. There's nothing big enough to move that rock. Therefore, it is a physical obstacle in your environment, and you have to deal with it. The second type of obstacles that you deal with are organizational obstacles, right? So what does this mean? Misaligned, bloated, convoluted, vertically aligned. In other words, where mindful thought into how an organization should be structured to best align practices from a lean perspective, right? We're always seeking that efficiency, and from principle number 11 in the agile principles, that simplicity, we're always looking for that ultimate in simplicity and efficiency, right? That elegance, that natural state of elegance systems can achieve. But businesses without clear, it's usually without clear vision. If there is no clear vision, if there are no strong values, right, then you have organizations where different groups find dominance or prominence in the budgetary chain, and they siphon off resources to ensure their survival. I'm not saying that this is done consciously. I'm saying that this is a body unchecked, unregulated, right? It's not healthy. It's eating the wrong foods. It's a fast food diet, whatever you want to call it. So there are organizational problems. And the last one is cultural, right? So you heard me even touch on that when I was talking about organizational. Lacking a clear vision, not understanding the mission, not having strong values by which we execute. Cultural obstacles are lack of vision, lack of purpose, lack of values, lack of leadership, lack of authority. It's a caste system, and it's sacrifice-based, right? In other words, to get what you need to get, you have to sacrifice. Somebody has to sacrifice, right? It's not an easy life, is all. So the thing about these big three obstacle types is that the one thing that you have in your control is actually culture. Now, if vision, mission, and values equal your culture, then that culture is actually the counterweight that allows you to move through a lot of different things. But you must have, or there must be a willingness to create a vision, a mission, a set of values by which everyone can agree this should be done. And then you have alignment. So these are, in order to overcome the organizational obstacles, you must overcome the cultural obstacles. Once you overcome those cultural obstacles and your organization is set, then you can deal with the physical obstacles that are there without complaint, because your focus is no longer about how we got here and whose fault it was, but simply how do we fix the problem so that we might most efficiently deliver our solution to the market. I'm sorry, I make it look like, well, that just makes sense. And to me it does, and I hope to you it does, because if, again, take a step back, look at the natural world, look at how it behaves. It teaches us, it will show us that these things resonate. So there are the three layers of the organization. There are three things the business needs, and at each layer they need those things. And there are three types of obstacles. Now, you can have those cultural and environmental and organizational obstacles at any of the three primary layers in your organization. So you have to be aware of it. This is that visibility, that constant playback into the visibility that is required of the three things that we need: visibility, predictability, and responsiveness, so that we can respond the moment we sense that there's an issue. You're building what? You're building essentially the nervous system of your organizational body by which your antibodies can then be brought to bear. And those antibodies may be coaches, it may be best practices, it may be training, it may be education, it may be hiring people, whatever it is that's necessary to stop that unhealthy behavior that was starting to happen. So those are the obstacles. Now, here's the cool thing. There are three types of people, and you need these three types of people. And these three types of people of change, They're not always the same. Okay? In organizations, we try and keep certain sets the same. So there are three types. There's a visionary, the person who says, I see a thing, I see a goal, or I see a problem, and I believe I know the way to solve it, or I believe I know the way to get to that wonderful place. Follow me. Now, depending on the language that visionary is using, not everybody's going to understand him. It's about context. It's about frame of reference. It's about the language by which we hear things. Right? So everything happens in its time. So a visionary steps forward and says, there's usually an interpreter. Somebody who hears that and goes, oh, okay. And there's another person standing there going, I don't get it. That was a bunch of gibberish. And the interpreter goes, oh, he's talking about that just over those hills over there. He's just gotten back from a trip. He knows that there's a better valley with really fertile lands. And, maybe we should go over there. And now the interpreter is explaining that vision. That interpreter is going to get other people who understand his language and can start to contribute. And that's when you get what we call implementers, the people who do the work. There's somebody who sees a vision, there's somebody who explains the vision, there is somebody who executes the day-to-day tasks that move us all towards that vision and the execution of it. Now, this happens at every layer. And the other thing we need to think about, and there's another video on this, is about emergent leadership, which is as something starts to emerge as a problem, there is usually somebody who's going to emerge who has the solution, who is the visionary. Right? The necessary visionary is what I call it. That person shows up as the necessary visionary, has the clear understanding of how to resolve it. There are at least three people, now this is the other thing I'll be talking about, there are at least three people who become the interpreter, who understand and can collaborate with the visionary and the implementers on executing the task, because those three interpreters have now garnered a body of about 15 people who can execute. Now, watch that video. That's its own thing, but it takes me into the next thing about threes, right? So there are three types of people. There's the visionary, the interpreter, and the implementer, and you need them at all levels. And I was talking about how we keep them in certain roles, in certain places. We expect at the executive layer, the CEO and the CTO, these are visionaries in their own rights. They're looking ahead about what is it that we're trying to execute and how are we going to do it? What technologies are we going to do? The interpreters, that's that product layer. Those are the people who are doing the coordination. They're listening to what the visionaries at the strategy layer are saying, and they're delivering it down in understandable pieces to the people who are doing the implementation, the daily work of it. This is just how it works. So that brings me to the other part. We see a lot of energy being spent around efforts that may not return a value. So how do we understand when something returns a value? Now, I look at this in my personal life. I've always been an idea guy. I've always, all my life, been like, hey, how about a blah, 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 and I say, and I know how to make a magnetic train work, and how about an electronic mailbox, or my best friend, Beth Lackey, glitter salt, right? All these ideas, but none of them came to fruition. Well, why not? Well, if I'm a visionary, and I'm throwing out my ideas, and there are no interpreters, it's not its time. Right? The field isn't ripe for that seed, but it's a seed nonetheless. The field may become fallow, and then that seed may become fertile in that field. You don't know. But what you do know is that, look, this is how life works. If it happens once, it's an accident. If it happens twice, we can say it's a coincidence. I don't personally believe in coincidence, but we can say it's a coincidence. The third time, it's a trend. So if we think about this in our personal relationships, hey, they lied to me once. All right, they lied to me twice. Okay, coincidence. Lied to me a third time. You're a liar. All right, that's the progression. Three things makes it a trend. So if I, as a visionary, go, let's climb a rainbow, and I get three people who go, man, that's fucking brilliant. How do we climb a rainbow? I'm not sure, but I think it starts with capturing a leprechaun. dude, I know somebody who understands leprechauns. Let me go get him. And that's how you start to amass the people. Now you've got 3 people who are around you. That's a trend. Now you have momentum. Now you have that energy that's necessary to carry yourself forward. This is how you know if you have the right ideas or the wrong ideas. This is how you know if you proceed past a certain point or don't. Once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a trend. 3 times is when you have 3 people who are committed to the vision, you now have the energy to execute. All right, so now this brings us down to winding things down, actually, into the execution of things. How do we execute? So I'm going to talk about specifically in the software world, agile software development methods. Primary of which, like the gateway drug to agile, is usually Scrum. I will talk about Kanban in just a second, but it's usually Scrum. Now, Scrum has a rule of 3. Kanban does not. I think I've made one up, and we'll talk about that in a second, but Kanban deserves its place in this conversation if I'm going to talk about Scrum. However, there's a rule of 3 in Scrum. Tea and water. I'm just thinking about how I'm going to... So in Scrum, there is a rule of 3. And the rule of 3 is this. There are 3 roles, 3 ceremonies, 3 artifacts, 3 things, right? 3, 3, 3. The power of 3. 3 is a magic number. I love 3. All right. So in Scrum, there are 3 roles. Now, what I love about this is we start to enter into what I call dynamic opposition. In order for certain things to work, they have to be put under tension. If you think about a rubber band, it doesn't work until you wrap it around something. And hold it is just, but you put it around something, now it's holding it. Now there's a tension, and it's serving its purpose. In our bodies, there are dynamic tensions, right? When I ruptured my Achilles, I found out that it's actually necessary for our body to be under tension in a particular way because the lower extremities, the heart doesn't really do a great job of being able to pump the body's blood back up. So as we walk, the body acts as a pump through the calf muscles and compression, right? So there needs to be a certain amount of tension on that system in order for the pump to work, or else there are problems that develop, which is how I learned about that. So we're going to enter into this. So here are the 3 roles. There is a product owner. Now the product owner is the voice of the stakeholder. The stakeholder can be the voice of the business, the voice of the customer. It is the voice of value. I think that's the best way to think about it. The value that you're attempting to deliver, because when we talk about writing user stories, we talk about them in that traditional sense of as a, I want, so that. 3 things. As a, I want, so that. And that's what the product owner is there to do, is to figure out how to best express that voice of the customer so that you're delivering the right set of value. Now, on the other side of that, so this is the voice of what we want. This is what the business has envisioned, right? This is at the lowest level execution. This small thing that this team is going to do is aligned to the largest initiative possible for that year so that we know that we're coordinated in our efforts, right? So at that lowest level, you have the individual contributors. Now, these are the subject matter experts. These are the people who actually write the code or publish the book or whatever it is that you do. These are the people who know how best to technically execute against the value statement the product owner is delivering. So they listen to the product owner. As a driver, I want a vehicle that is autonomous in nature so that I can read up and study before I get to work rather than spend time focusing on the road. Excellent. Now you have the mechanics and the engineers and the developers of all the different systems that go into that, or maybe just the software piece of that, right? The autonomous navigation piece, sitting there saying, okay, what are the constraints that we have on the system currently that says what pieces we can and cannot execute properly? So they push back on the product owner to say, okay, if you want it this way, it's got to look like this, and we've got to develop it like this, and it has to flow like this. But we can't get to the final end state until this and this and this occurs in a particular fashion. And by the way, you forgot about this, which has to be done first and foremost. So we've got to write a new story for this. Now that can be contentious, right? Because the product owner is the voice of value, the voice of what we're trying to deliver, and all they are is an empathetic expression of, but I want them, there's a problem. We're trying to solve this problem, and you're telling me I can't solve my problem. So there's a push. Dynamic tension. Now to help resolve that natural dynamic tension, this is where a piece of conscious intention from the Agile world came in. They said, what you need is a third person. Not a manager, but someone we'll call the Scrum Master, that person who facilitates the conversation of what is technically possible and what is theoretically possible to ensure that the right thing is being delivered in the right way at the right time and everybody's in agreement. So the Scrum Master is the third role. Now, Jesse, wait a second. You said there are 3 roles. You said product owner, individual contributors who are the subject matter experts, but who are they? That's a role. Individual contributor is considered a role, and it speaks for what is considered the bulk of the team. Then you have the Scrum Master, who is what I like to call the den mother, the one who's sitting there going, okay, like, is it snack time, or do we need to take a nap, or let's use our quiet voices, or whatever the case might be. But that Scrum Master is the servant leader on the team. They're there to facilitate the success of that team. They're there to help remove those blocks and impediments. They're there to ensure that the dynamic tension is kept in the appropriate balance so that we're ever advancing towards the goal while ever evolving in our practices so that we get better and better, while we evolve ourselves. Now, this is what we thrive on, right? We go back to Daniel Pink once again. There are 3 things people work for. Big 3, there it is again. 3 things people work for. They work for purpose, sense of mastery, and a sense of autonomy. We are intrinsically motivated. We want something more than just the money we receive. So if I do take a job, it's because I believe in some element of that job and that I can contribute my skill set, my mastery to it in a way that best allows me to do so. The autonomy that I seek in doing it, and the experiences that I have, and my passion and belief in why I'm doing what I'm doing allows my self-mastery to grow because I'm ever learning and ever aligning and ever getting better and ever reflecting on how I might do that to better serve the purpose that I believe in. But what does it take? It takes a clear vision, a clear mission, and a clear set of values. It takes a culture to support that. So those are the 3 roles. Those 3 roles have 3 ceremonies that they perform in a Scrum period. Now, let's be clear. What is a Scrum period? We're talking about sprints, also known as iterations, right? Doesn't matter. I remember when I first, what's this? I hear sprint and I hear iteration. One is go fast and one is a period of time. I don't. Oh wait, go fast in a brief period of time. I get it. Sprint is an iteration. Oh, okay. Sometimes being an autodidact sucks, right? A little bit slow on the uptake in certain places. But sprint, iteration, same thing. So we look for, in the Scrum world, this is where we're different from Waterfall, right? Waterfall was always a fixed time, no fixed scope, no fixed resource, right? In other words, we want to get a big thing done in this period of time, and we're probably going to grow the scope over this period of time, and we're probably going to pull and push people in and out of that while we're doing it. So yeah, we may not probably deliver with any accuracy anything that looks valuable at all at any given point in the history of our organization. Whoops. Agile says, let's have fixed resources and fixed period of time, and or not fixed resources, but fixed period of time and fixed scope, and let's make sure that we're predictable in what we move through there, right? So if I say we can do 10 stories every 2 weeks, I'm hitting 10 stories every 2 weeks. That's the predictability. So this is really what iterative development or Scrum-based development gives us, is the ability to set a time span of 1 to 4 weeks. That's it, 1 to 4 weeks, right? Where we say we can commit to delivering this body of developmental work. X number of stories equaling X number of points. Now, points are assigned, and here's another 3 thing in the Agile world. A story point confuses a lot of people. And we need to understand this because that's part of ceremonies. So a story point is Engineers like one-to-one correlations. They want, 1 point equals 1 hour. So what does a story point mean? A story point means 3 things, or a combination of 3 things, or any one of those 3 things: complexity, effort, and doubt. Wait, what? Complexity, effort, and doubt. We normally measure these things using a Fibonacci sequence, right? The Fibonacci, or a modified Fibonacci, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Some people go to 20, some people go to to the appropriate 21. It doesn't really matter, because what you're doing is you're outlining any one of those 3 values by the points you assign to a story. So if I have a 1-point story, most likely it's not very complex, not a lot of effort, not a lot of doubt about what we're doing. So it's going to be easy. 1 or 2 tasks, we're done. I got a 2-point story. You know what? It's just a little bit bigger than a 1-point story, because 1, 2, it's right next to it. What's grown a little bit? Maybe the effort, maybe the complexity, most likely not the doubt. 3, a little bit bigger. Scope has increased, so complexity or effort has increased. Still not doubt so much, because 1, 2, 3, right next to each other. Then we go to 5. Oh, there's a gap. There's an unknown element in the middle. So that tells us what's just grown there. That's probably doubt. We are uncertain about what it takes to actually execute against some elements of this work. 8, even more doubt has entered into it. So a story point, complexity, effort, and doubt. Those are the 3 things. Now, back to the ceremonies. There are 3 ceremonies that these 3 roles perform. Now, be clear, an agile team has all 3 roles on it. These are not 3 different groups. This is one team: a product owner, a Scrum Master, and the individual contributors. And they have 3 ceremonies they perform. And one of the ceremonies is sprint planning. So that sprint, 1 to 4 weeks. Now, most teams will start at about a 4-week. And then they all average out to about 2 weeks in time, because 2 weeks is the most efficient, measurable. It becomes the elegant expression. 2 weeks just makes sense. 3 weeks is a little too long. 1 week is a little too short. And if you want to do development 1 week at a whack, you may want to go Kanban, which I'm going to talk about later. Right? But if you're 2 weeks, it's like the 440. It's the right length for a sprint, So the ceremonies are sprint planning. While we're in one sprint developing the work, we have to be somewhere in the middle towards the tail end of it, planning the work for the next one. So the product owner is showing up and saying, here's where the new priorities lie. Based on the feedback we've received and based on what the business wants, these are the next set of stories that we're going to develop. How best are we going to do it? And the team sits down and they start talking about, what does it take? Do we break it down even further? Do we need another story over here? Are all the tasks in place? Is this blocked? Are we dependent on somebody else? That's the sprint planning. In other words, we're thinking consciously about what it takes, what is the effort, what are all the elements that go into actually executing the next body of work that we're willing to commit to, X number of stories equaling X number of points in a given period of time, right? The team has to commit to it. They all have to be willing to say, yeah, I believe we can do all of this work. If one voice says we can't do it, then you have to keep asking the question, why not? Why do you think we can't do it? What are the risks? Because there might be. So that's one ceremony, sprint planning. Second ceremony, daily stand-up. What? Every day that team meets 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. The goal of the meeting is simple. There are only 3 things they talk about. There it is again, the power of 3, right? The rule of 3, the power of 3. 3 things they talk about. What did I do? What am I doing? And am I blocked? No solutioning. The Scrum Master is there to facilitate that conversation. So they go around. Whoever starts. Hey, I finished task 137. I'm starting tasks 279, 178, and hopefully I'm going to pick up on story such and such, but I'm still waiting on that dependency to come through. Scrum Master makes a note. Check on dependency. Next person talks. Nobody goes, hey, why didn't you hear from it? You don't solve the problem. This is planning. You're there to understand what you did, what you're going to do, does something have to change? And are there any risks and impediments that need to be pushed back up the chain so that the Scrum Master can remove those obstacles so that we can ensure smooth delivery, right? This is sense and respond, which is critical to any organization. Again, responding at any level of the organization. So the daily stand-up. Sprint planning, daily stand-up. Sprint planning, daily planning. And the last one, the last ceremony is now, there's contention around this. There's the review and demo, and then there's the retro. Now the retro is a ceremony that stands outside of the 3 ceremonies of Scrum. The third one is the review and demo. Let's be clear. The purpose of Scrum is to deliver a minimum viable, valuable product, right? Minimal shippable, you'll hear sometimes, minimal viable value. Whatever it is, it has to be functioning code with an express purpose that can be demonstrated. The value must be demonstrated. You don't show up to the review and demo and go, well, you know, we spent 8 hours doing a lot of code and I've got nothing to show for it, but don't worry, it's gonna be great. No, you show that 8 hours of code and you say these are the values we expect to get from it. If you are doing design, if you're doing spike work, right? If you're doing that investigatory, this is the direction we may take this thing in. Otherwise, you're showing here's where we enhanced this feature, here's where we added a feature, here's where we removed a defect, here's where we've done this. That is the third ceremony that's required by Scrum. Show the proof of value, right? So the team asks, you got to understand in the Agile world, we talk about working agreements and we talk about asks, and we don't properly frame what's going on in those expressions. Implicitly, the team is asked for the liberty to try and get to a predictable state by figuring out their best practices, their working agreements for how to deliver the software that they're responsible for, or whatever the product might be. And they're willing to commit that in a given period of time, they will give so much value, right? In 2 weeks, 10 stories, guaranteed. That's their ask. Give us the room to get to that state. And if we can achieve that state, we will give you that state regularly. The business says, okay, we'll give you that, but in return, at the end of every iteration, you must prove that the time you have spent on the stories that you have chosen have value. What is that value? It's a give-get. It's the nature of the world. It's how it all works. It's an expectation that's not unrealistic, I think, right? If you ask for liberty, you have to show the value of that liberty to those who have given it to you. Might have wandered into a political field. We're not going to touch that just yet. So that's the 3 ceremonies, right? We're planning for the work that we're going to do. We're talking about the work that we're doing, and we're making sure that we're doing the right work. And then we're going to show you the work that we've done, and that it was the right work, and that it does function properly. It's a pretty simple set of commitments by a pretty simple set of roles, right? But it's simple. But as any cooking show will tell you, make a simple dish. You better do it right. So the more simple it is, the more elegant it is, the more lean it is, the more balanced it is in its application, the easier it is to maintain, but the harder it is to get there, right? It takes practice. It takes effort. To get there, there are 3 artifacts. There are 3 artifacts that they use for this. The 3 artifacts are this. There is a backlog. And by backlog, we mean a universal backlog or a product backlog, that big body of work that is constantly in evolving decomposition to ensure that the right things are being floated to the top to be pulled off and set for the next iterative development. Right? So there's a product backlog or a universal backlog, and let's just quickly assume that you're out to rule the world, right? You're an evil villain, and you're looking to collect minions and take over the world. So your product backlog says something at the very top that was huge. Take over the world. Well, there's a lot that goes into that. So now we have to decompose it. If you're going to take over the world, how are you going to do it? Are you going to use classic evil villain attempts? Are you going to innovate on evil villain attempts? Or are you going to mix the two or combine the two? So there's 3 big themes. We break it down. And then we say, okay, in order to do any one of these themes, what are the things we also need from there? Well, I need minions. All right, well, how am I going to dress the minion? Am I expecting them to be subpar? Am I expecting them to be smart enough to use a gun? Or can I only give them billy clubs? So that backlog is constantly being broken down so that the larger ideas are on the bottom being broken and the smaller ones are being brought to the top as their value is being recognized and their ability to execute in practical nature is recognized as well. So there's a variety of There's a variety of planning methods to assure you're finding the right priority of work. That's a whole other conversation. So those are the 3 roles, the 3 ceremonies, and the 3, well, that's not the 3 artifacts. So that was the product backlog. So again, the top of it, the very tippy top, the cream of your product bottle, if you will, is then skimmed off the top and delivered down to the team or teams for them to take their piece of and then to start working on in the iterative. So we're seeing big concepts to smaller ones getting to the top, which is the top of the funnel. Actually, if you flip it, the big concept is decomposed, made smaller, and dropped into the funnel, and the funnel goes into the engine, right? But the reality is in your backlog, it's kind of reversed. So the third artifact is simply one metric, a burn down chart. How am I progressing against the hours that are remaining to do this work? That's it. What is the body of work I plan on doing? What is the body of work I'm working on? And how am I progressing against that body work against the time span that I've said I would commit to it in? That's Scrum. In rough, those are the 3 roles, the 3 ceremonies, and the 3 artifacts. If you want to know more, go to the Scrum Alliance. Go to Agile Alliance. You can go to the Scrum site. There's a lot in there. There are values. There are things about transparency and what the culture of a true, Scrum organization might be. But that's the quick 3, right? These are the roles. These are their responsibilities in relationship to each other. These are the things that they do together to ensure that they're working on the right things at the right time. And these are the artifacts that they use to ensure that they are working on those right things at the right time. And are they doing the work in the appropriate fashion at the appropriate time? Pretty elegant. So that takes us kind of that's the end of the 3s as I know them. So I made one up about Kanban. And the reason why is because if you talk about Scrum, you have to talk about Kanban. Kanban is also perceived as an entry-level approach for Agile methodologies. And it's a false trail. Kanban is actually a highly disciplined method of continuous delivery, right? In the software world, it works like this. So if Scrum has fixed time, right, and fixed scope, Kanban doesn't, right? Kanban doesn't task stories out. So in Scrum, we tend to task a story out. We say, if this is what we're trying to accomplish, what are all the necessary steps to do this, so that we have a very clear picture of what it's going to take, so that we're planning not just by velocity, the number of points a team can consume, but by capacity, the number of hours individuals actually have to give in that period of time. Then you're delivering a balanced load against those 2 values. Kanban says, give me a team of people who are experts, and we will feed them a continual backlog of requests, and they will pick them up and they will move them through the stages of development that they have outlined that they work in. So for software development, roughly, it's going to be, there's a backlog, there's probably a review to ensure that it's the right work and that you're doing the right work in the right time. You can do it on the backlog, or you can do it in its own column. And then there's another column of, you're designing the solution, you're developing the solution, you're testing the solution, you're delivering the solution for user level acceptance testing, right? User acceptance testing, or whatever you have as a stage to determine complete, and then a final one of accepted. The work is done and off it goes. So in Kanban, work is being continually delivered, and they have to be very disciplined in looking at what they're working on in any one of those given states. So they have WIP limits, work in progress. Now, if the human limit is 3, guess what? Systemically, your limits are around 3, right? We can overload them, but you might want to start with 3 as a limit to see, can you do more or less? But in each one of those columns, you might have 2 or 3 people who can do the design work, the development work, the testing work. There may be some overlaps there. There could be 2 primary developers who have some secondary testing. There could be one primary tester who has some secondary developing. There could be those overlaps so that we can see if I've got 3 in this one column, do I have enough people doing the work? Or can I bring more work in for those 3 people to do if there's only 2 things in flight? Or is the tester so busy that it can only be 2 right now? Right? So this is how we start to understand or actually refine the engine. But most people think, oh, well, I can just put my traditional waterfall states of program or process development in there, and off I go happy-dappy, and I'll do priority ranking on each one of those columns. That's not the case. See, Kanban is actually, so here it is. It's pull-based. The team takes what it can in each one of those phases of development that it's going to move through. All right? There's no estimates involved, and there's no tasking. Right? The goal is that the stories wind up being roughly the same size, and you can figure that out through the metrics that come out of it. And we'll talk about metrics as a final 3. It's another one I kind of made up. But that's another place where Kanban is different, because the metrics in Kanban are very different than the metrics in Scrum. I've talked about burn down, but there are 3 basic metrics. Let me go there before I finish Kanban. 3 basic metrics in Scrum. There's the burn down, the burn up, and then cumulative flow. And those are just agile general metrics, right? Those are the big 3 people asked for. Show me the burn up, show me the burn down, show me the cumulative flow. And the cumulative flow can illustrate what the WIP limits are and where things are in any given phase of development. So I'm a big fan of the cumulative flow. Kanban, cumulative flow is where cumulative flow comes from Kanban. Highly adapted into agile use all over the place, right? Burn up, burn down, primarily, Scrum or agile. The other 2 metrics in Kanban are cycle time and throughput. So if a Scrum team measures velocity, which is what are the number of points we can consume every period, right? So if I can do 10 points, that can be 6 stories to 12 stories sometimes, right? The number of stories vary, but if I'm always doing X number of points, that's my consistent predictable value. Kanban doesn't have that. Kanban has throughput. In other words, in a given period of time, usually a month, how many things have I moved through? And were they stories or were they defects? So what was the total of each and what was the total, right? Then the other thing you get into is cycle time. How long did everything take going from one state to the next state? These are your lead times. So how long does it take to take that idea that goes into the backlog and actually send it out to the market, right? So that's what Kanban is giving you by opening up those states. It's really getting into refining that delivery and understanding the true flow in a continuous mode, right? So no estimates, stories are all the same size, there's no time box boundaries on it, and it reads differently. You use cumulative flow, lead times, or cycle times, and throughput, right? So very different than Scrum. And normally what you see happen is Scrum evolves into what's called lightweight Scrum. If you have a persistent team, right, that's a real critical piece about agile development is a persistent team. Keep the same group of experts together as long as you can, working on the same problem so that you can maximize the power of their intelligence and efficiencies and continue and familiarization with the content, right? So now you have a well-honed set of professionals who are constantly delivering. Well, if you do that, they get into what's called lightweight Scrum. Lightweight Scrum is where they stop tasking the stories, right? They know so well what they do, they don't need to task the story, they just size the story and off it goes. And they probably stop sizing the stories. And around that point, and by the way, studies back in 2013 out of the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon show that, hang on a second, water, and I got to catch that thought. Show the value of persistent teams. Talk about 7 plus or minus 2 is the best value, and that the gains you get in predictability and productivity. And they show that the most effective team, the most efficient team in all categories that they were measuring at that time, which was predictability, productivity, responsiveness, and quality, they showed that the lightweight Scrum teams were the best overall in performance, right? The highest percentile averages across the board. But Kanban is the next evolutionary step. So if you think about Kanban as actually being like black belt karate, or any martial art, then you understand that Scrum are the other belts leading up to black belt, and then you move to Kanban. So please, I had to throw it in. It's not necessarily a real power of three or rule of three, but pay attention. Choose the right course of action when you're going into an agile world. All right. There it is. I managed to carry all those different things in my head because they were one big thought. And that big thought was that 3 is a magic number and that there is power in the rules of 3.